BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Tuesday, and on Tuesdays this year I've been talking to you guys about the story of JonBenet Ramsey, perhaps the most famous unsolved mystery in American history. And in this episode, I'll be sharing my final thoughts on the case. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the story of JonBenet Ramsey. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Black Box Ned. And welcome to the Final Verdict episode. As many of you know, Black Box Online Radio is a true crime program that comes to you Monday through Friday here on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts under the names Black Box Podcast or Black Box True Crime. But this will be the final episode in the JonBenet series. As many of you guys know as well, we also have Zodiac Monday here on Black Box Online Radio, Cooper Friday, but I never called this segment JonBenet Tuesday or anything of the sort, because it was always intended to be a temporary segment. And I'm going to share my final thoughts in this episode, but I also want to let you know that next week on the Tuesday show, there will be a new series started discussing the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. So once again, if you're curious about unsolved mysteries, feel free to subscribe and hit the notification bell and follow along. JonBenet Ramsey was found dead in the basement of her Boulder, Colorado home on December 26 of 1996. The other three residents of the home were John, her father, Patsy, the mother, and Burke, her brother. And when I started this series, I was picking up where I had left off from some other discussions that had happened on BBOR over the years. I made my first episodes about JonBenet back in 2018, and I received a comment from somebody named Carla, and she said, "You are brave to cover this story after what was done to that child." And I really thought that that was a bizarre thing to say, because I was like, this is a true crime channel. I talk about similar stories all the time, but I admit that she was right. And that was in 2018, 7 years ago at the time of this recording, and she was right. I mean, something about getting older, perhaps. Out of all the stories that I talk about on Black Box Online Radio, whether it's the Zodiac Killer, D.B. Cooper, Jack the Ripper, the Black Dahlia, this is the one that bothers me the most. And I even felt that it was inappropriate to say something like JonBenet Tuesday as the name of the segment, even though that's what I am discussing, because there's just something about this crime being done to a 6-year-old girl, where she was struck in the head, strangled, sexually assaulted, and it bothered me. It bothered me, and I never wanted this thing to become an obsession, or I never wanted it to become some type of permanent segment where there would be even an insinuation that there would be an ounce of exploitation. And I intended it for it to be a temporary segment. So you might be wondering, well, then why are you talking about launching a Madeleine McCann series? Madeleine McCann was also a child. Yes, but to the best of our knowledge, that is still a missing persons case, and I also am not planning on launching McCann Tuesday or having any type of name associated with that. That will most likely be a temporary series as well. I used to follow the disappearance of Madeleine McCann back in 2018 and 19 for Black Box Online Radio, and of course, it might be the most famous missing persons case in the world, so I was familiar with the story before that. But with the JonBenet case, I really had to realize that there is a certain way to explore the mystery. There's a certain way to evaluate the findings. I made episodes in 2018, and I made some in 2023, really the winter of 2022 going into the next year, and I was never able to get over the initial hurdle, and that is that there are things that are widely discussed, such as the ransom note, such as the DNA evidence, and of course the suspects, particularly John, Patsy, Burke, and the intruder. And in both 2018 and 2023, I made episodes about those subjects, and I figured, all right, I've talked about the major points, it's time to move on. So with this series that you have been listening to over the last 6 months, I really think that I got above that hurdle. I got over that hill, and I was really able to get into the world of JonBenet research and looking at a lot of other angles and examples of people researching this case very closely. The original design that I had for this series was to follow Perfect Murder, Perfect Town by Lawrence Schiller. I was going to call this The Imperfect Murder, do a direct response. Each week read, 1 to 3 chapters of the book and then follow along with that and give my responses. But it turns out that even though that book might be a very, very big exploration into the case, perhaps it's not the best one to use to follow with a multi-part discussion series on YouTube. Lawrence Schiller didn't write it for that reason, nothing against him, but that book really is not something that is going to be used in that format. Lots of details, very simple things that are going on, lots of things that are unrelated to the case, but his intention was to tell the whole story. So I began making the episodes in different ways and looking at what other writers think. I did a direct response to Chaina Roth and her book Cold Cases, a direct response to Denise Diana Huddle's book Zodiac and Anthrax to Zodiac, as well as looking at the other possible perpetrators, John Ramsey and Patsy Ramsey. And because this is the final verdict episode, I will share everything with you guys very clearly. And excuse me for the 6-minute introduction, but, this is wrapping things up, so I wanted to give you guys the story. And I started out as someone who supported the intruder theory, and I received an enormous amount of backlash for that. 2018, 2023, and in this year, 2025, a lot of people were just very, very upset at even thinking that anyone other than John, Patsy, or Burke, or maybe one of the family associates was involved, but just to think that there was some unidentified perpetrator who murdered JonBenet Ramsey, you will receive backlash for that. John Douglas talked about this very clearly in interviews after his book, The Cases That Haunt Us, came out, and he just simply said that he received, a lot of counter arguments from people. People were very confrontational with him, and they've done that with me as well, and things did not slow down. But I got over that hurdle, and I really began exploring the comments that were made by other people, whether it's Detective Steve Thomas or James Kohler, or perhaps just some of the people making their own commentaries on YouTube. And I ultimately ended up knowing less than I thought I knew. I ended up in the unknown category, where I'm not able to tell you who murdered JonBenet and how they did it. But my biggest takeaway in this whole setup was, I think that John Ramsey became a much stronger suspect, and that's bad, because if that's true, he's the biggest sociopath to ever live. And John Douglas even talks about that in the book, The Cases That Haunt Us, when he stated very clearly that either you're the best liar in the world or you're innocent. I mean, all the public appearances that John Ramsey has done, going to CrimeCon, writing 2 books in the public sphere. And one of the things that I watched recently was his presentation / interview / discussion at CrimeCon that was moderated by an individual named Paula Woodward, who wrote a book called We Have Your Daughter, and she also wrote an anniversary book. And she was a reporter who had covered the case. And if I ever pick up the JonBenet Ramsey story again, I would love to read her book and look at the ideas that she has shared, because she is a supporter of the intruder theory. And now that I'm way more skeptical of the intruder theory, I would love to just know exactly why she thinks the way she does. And I have direct episodes on the intruder theory, 2 of them actually. One of them is a point-by-point analysis looking at all of the evidence. I have an episode about John Ramsey as a suspect, Patsy Ramsey as a suspect. I mean, the episode about Burke is considerably older, but as far as John Ramsey's involvement, you guys might not agree with this, but I think that he was the only suspect in my book that could have committed this crime and done the whole thing himself. If your suspect is Patsy or Burke, you're going to have to start involving other people in your theory. You're going to have some other type of individual who is aiding and abetting, particularly John Ramsey. And in most of the theories, most of them, but not all, John is viewed as somewhat of an accomplice or a participant. Like, for example, somebody said they thought that Burke killed JonBenet and that Patsy did the staging, and then she got John's help to further the staging to make it more advanced, and that's why he's covering for both of them, and they pulled him into the story. And I mean, okay, that's a theory that starts out with Patsy doing it, but then John has to become a participant. Or how about the most famous one? How about the most famous one, that JonBenet stole a piece of pineapple from Burke, he hit her with the flashlight, and then who stages the scene? John and Patsy, okay? I mean, again, all of the Ramseys are participants in that. But I think that John Ramsey could have been the only person who could have committed that crime by himself, written the note by himself, and also brought JonBenet to the basement. And when you hear the thing from Detective Linda Arndt about how she sent John Ramsey to search through the house mostly to keep him busy, just to give him something to do, because they're sitting around waiting, allegedly not knowing what happened. And even though Detective Linda Arndt was extremely bothered by John Ramsey, she didn't know whether he had done something or not. She was just bothered by his actions and activities, so she told him to search the house from top to bottom. He goes to the bottom of the house, to the basement, and he finds JonBenet relatively quickly. Now, is this not something where it seems like he's setting it up so he could have been the one to find the body, provide explanations about why his clothing fibers are on her body, why he's touching the duct tape? That was the single biggest takeaway that I had from this entire series. When I did the episode on John Ramsey as a suspect, and I was saying that if John was the one that staged the scene, imagine just how somebody would be thinking if they were the one that committed the crime, and they're like, oh no, my fingerprints are going to be on the underside of the duct tape. They could be on the outside of the duct tape, that would be fine, but if they're on the underside of the duct tape, then that's going to make me look guilty. I have to be the one who finds the body and removes the duct tape to provide the explanation. So that might not be something that would hold up in a court of law. And as I said in that episode, any defense attorney could dismantle some type of challenge to that. But that's not how a murderer would be thinking. That's not how a criminal would have been thinking. And, I openly admit that John Ramsey seems like the only person who could have brought JonBenet to the basement. Maybe she even ate the pineapple from Burke's bowl on the way down, and then he did something to her in the basement. By something, I mean something inappropriate done to children. She resisted, so he hit her, he panicked, and then he staged the scene to cover it up. Now, all of this stuff about how they don't believe that somebody could have written the ransom note after they had committed that crime. John Douglas said it. Dr. Todd Grande even said it. I mean, he said that he didn't think that anybody could have written the 2.5-page ransom note after they had murdered a child. Then in his first video, then he implicates the Ramseys. He's like, well, I think the Ramseys did it. Whoa, I was like, wait a second, how on earth does that make any sense? And ultimately, he made a follow-up video where he had a reversal and supported the intruder theory. But here's something that I will offer to you. Sociopathy, psychopaths, people who are sociopathic or psychopathic do not show this type of nervousness in those particular situations, especially if it was something like a major accident that had gone wrong. Now, I'm not accusing John Ramsey directly. I mean, I definitely don't think those accusations would hold up in a court of law. It's just a way that I connected the dots in my own way, going from somebody who thought that the Ramseys had nothing to do with this to giving strong consideration. So I would put the theories in this way: intruder, John, Burke, and then Patsy. I think Patsy Ramsey is the worst suspect in all of this. And one thing that I do stand by is I believe that people are still just zoning in on Patsy Ramsey because they don't like her demeanor, they don't like the way she talks, they don't like the way she acts, they don't like her word choices, they don't like her personality. And you know what? I don't either. There's just so many things that are bothersome. There's a reason why the deception detective was zoning in so much on her speech patterns, because she's a very awkward person. That's number one. She was also a relatively sloppy person. Like, I said this stuff, and during the Dr. Casbah interview, he brought it up, and I agreed with it, when it's pointing out that the Ramsey household was an absolute mess, and they just had junk everywhere, and the housekeeper, Linda Hoffman Pugh, must have been working hard for that money. And I don't mean just junk, and I don't just mean soda cans in the bathroom sink. I mean, Burke is throwing feces around, even in JonBenet's bedroom. So those are things that are very, very just almost infuriating to hear about. It's frustrating to hear about, even if you're not actively involved, when you just hear all of these things about how Patsy's trying to put on this image to her friends and family about how they have the perfect family, and they're writing this Ramsey newsletter that goes out. And I have to give credit to Dr. Andrew Vandervaart for sharing that. Excuse me, I called him Dr. Alex Vandervaart in a previous episode, Dr. Andrew. And he just brought up the Ramsey family newsletter that she would send out, like an email chain that was done back in the 90s. She's trying to make this image look outward, where she is part of the perfect family, but in reality, they were a mess. Now the question is, was there some type of darker secret going on? Was there some type of very, very nasty abuse in the family going on? I mean, you guys can be the judge, and you can weigh in the comments section down below. And I think it was Flora and Fauna who responded to my latest post, saying that Fleet White also needs to be looked at and examined as a suspect, because he's in the basement with John Ramsey, and he's also present for almost everything that's happening in the basement. Was he not also there to move things around and make the scene look awkward? And, that is something worthy of consideration. And if I ever pick up the JonBenet series again, absolutely, I would look at Fleet White as a suspect, the friend who went into the basement with John Ramsey. And the whole story just stinks. Something is wrong. Firstly, they have this 2.5-page ransom note written, which is purely excessive. Secondarily, you have them making the phone call. Maybe a third person can be heard in the background of the phone call. This is the 911 call. Then they immediately call all of their friends who come into the house. They're kind of just moving around the house, spreading who knows what kind of evidence. And then why on earth didn't law enforcement just say no one in and out, everybody has to stay in the living room? I know it's terrible, I know it's the day after Christmas, but you have to do this because of police procedures. And the explanation that was provided by law enforcement was they didn't know that they were dealing with a kidnapping, they didn't know that they were dealing with a murder. They thought that they were dealing with a kidnapping. They thought that JonBenet was gone. Okay, for people in law enforcement, all they had was the ransom note. And when you actually do look at the behaviors of the Ramseys, they're horribly suspicious, where they just don't seem shocked that nobody makes a call. But I really want to ask you guys, though, this is still something that I acquired for this new series for 2025, and that is what was brought up by one of you guys in the comments section, saying that, wait a second, Patsy Ramsey found this ransom note, and she didn't read it very clearly, according to her, but it says that we'll call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow. Does that mean that it was written the night before, and they were intended to find it and expect that the call was going to come at 8 to 10 at 10 a.m. on December 26th, or does it mean tomorrow, meaning when she picks it up and reads it tomorrow from that point, and the call was supposed to come on December 27th? And some people even think that there was an intruder, and the intruder was hiding in the basement the whole time and just waiting for to see if they call or not. Then the intruder sneaks out the window, on top of the suitcase, and leaves the scuff mark, and then exits through the grate and then walks outside. I think that that's very far-fetched. And this is what I mean when I said I have problems with the intruder theory. Alright, if something like that actually happened, why was there a cobweb covered with leaves still on the window? Shouldn't that have been disturbed if a grown man is trying to sneak out? And one of the explanations that was provided by supporters of the intruder theory was that, it doesn't take that long for a spider web to form. A spider can make a web relatively quickly. I actually looked it up for the purposes of this discussion series, and it said that how long does it take for a spider to make a web? 30 minutes to an hour. I will give you that one, except for the fact that it was covered in leaves and debris, which means that it looks much older than 1 hour. But also, I really have to give credit to the YouTuber Call Me Chris, who pointed things out about how, alright, there might be marks on the suitcase, but we don't know where those are from. There might be a scuff mark on the wall, but we don't know where that was from. Oh, there might be a window that is broken, but John Ramsey said he broke it himself the summer before, yet it was never fixed, so we don't know that that was involved with any type of intruder theory. Alright, so I'm completely on board with that. I completely follow that train of thought. We do not know that there are connections there. And I've also told you guys this, but for the concluding episode, one of the books that I would really like to incorporate into a future JonBenet Ramsey series is Lou and JonBenet by John Wesley Anderson. And I told you that I was a large supporter of the intruder theory. The largest supporter of the intruder theory was Lou Smith. And I had somewhat of a reversal about him as a true crime follower, and as somebody who tries to learn about these true crime cases. Lou Smith went from being one of my possible heroes to being one of my possible nemeses, because he might just be one of the biggest villains in this whole case, spreading disinfo, saying things that were not true, trying to push a theory with inaccuracies, and also not admitting when he was wrong, not backing down from contradictory evidence, and who knows about his true motivations. He again went from someone whom I thought very highly of, whom I thought was a very respectable detective, to someone who perhaps might not even be worthy of respect at all. If he intentionally fudged the facts to get a desired result, to support the intruder theory, when the evidence was not there, that's bad. That's bad. So one thing that I had thought about doing was, taking the book Lou and JonBenet by John Wesley Anderson and using that for a future JonBenet series. Because what I'm trying to say is that on Fridays I talk to you guys about D.B. Cooper Friday here on Black Box Online Radio, and in that series I conclude the episodes by looking at the writings of Dr. David G. Hubbard. He wrote 2 books, one is called The Skyjacker, and one is called Winning Back the Sky, and I conclude the episodes with what is called the Cooper Profile segment. But with the JonBenet episodes, I've been really tempted to use John Wesley Anderson's book as a way to conclude the episodes by really looking at the life and career of Lou Smith. I've gone through the free sample that was from Amazon, and it's mostly about the, career history of Lou Smith in the free parts, and I thought this might be an interesting way to explore true crime history, as well as looking at some of these allegations and problems that people have with Lou Smith. But overall, though, I do want to talk to you guys about what happened to JonBenet. And one thing that I am still not convinced of at all is that Burke did it. I told you, for a very long time in this episode, I was giving some major credence to this claim that John Ramsey might have been the killer. But the theory that I absolutely cannot accept is the one where JonBenet just steals a piece of pineapple, Burke hits her with a flashlight, and the parents are saying, "Oh, we already lost JonBenet, let's not lose Burke too." No, that's almost certainly what not happened. They would have just called 911, and then they would have brought her to a hospital. Maybe they would have made up a different cover story, but I just absolutely do not think that they would have staged this scene, strangled her, and committed the sexual assault. And this is what Paula Woodward was talking about at CrimeCon when she's saying that in a private interview that she did with the coroner, again, this is not one that was public, so you kind of have to take her word for it, but they were saying that they received this information from the coroner that when JonBenet was hit over the head, she was strangled almost immediately afterward, that the strangulation and the head wound happened within a very, very short amount of time. So then proponents of the Burke did it theory are saying that, well, perhaps Burke put the rope around her neck and tried to drag her body by pulling her by her head. And I'm not even joking. That's what has been shared in countless places on the internet, and they call it the toggle rope theory. And I don't necessarily think that that's what happened at all. I think that is ridiculous, and it just has too many problems for me to accept. Too many assumptions, and it's also just a horribly, horribly vicious way to cover up somebody giving an accidental blow on the head when they had better options, when they had more reasonable options. And this is one of the reasons why I was a strong proponent of the intruder theory for so long, because I just thought that that theory made no sense to me. If a stun gun was used and the Ramseys didn't own a stun gun, that should also rule them out. Now, the stun gun theory is also something where I've gone from absolutely not to uncertain. And again, when you look at the pictures of people who have been victims of a stun gun abuse or they have had a stun gun used on them, it does look similar to what happened to JonBenet. And Lou Smith went on national television multiple times showing, like, this is what happens when you use a stun gun on a pig, and look at these photos. He did his own experiments. However, I've already told you that I'm calling his credibility into question. I'm just recognizing that I don't know enough to completely exclude the stun gun theory the way that I did perhaps in 2022 and 2023. So we have some challenge questions that we can explore here, and that is, number one, what do you think happened? To all of you who think that Burke did this, to all of you who think that Burke was responsible for this crime, do you believe that Burke hit JonBenet on accident and the parents covered it up? One of the theories that I discussed on a recent episode was that somebody put forward their theory that Burke did it, but he did everything. He did all of the criminal activities, the sexual assault, the duct tape, the restraints. He did that in a very, very brutal and sadistic crime, and Patsy covered for him. And Patsy wrote the ransom note, and then Patsy brought John involved. I alluded to that particular theory in just a couple of minutes ago, but that would be one where Burke did it, and it provides an explanation about why she was strangled and why she had the duct tape over her mouth and why she was sexually assaulted. Giving a shout out to Silver Stuff in the comments section, who was perhaps the loudest voice in the followers of Black Box Online Radio about how it was Burke and a friend. And she brings up the point that, not a lot of people are talking about the friend, but Crime Central did multiple episodes where they're even calling him out by name, saying that it was Burke and Doug Stein, and I can't really elaborate on it too much more than that. But in terms of the likelihood, to all of you who think that Burke Ramsey did it, please let me know your theory in the comments section down below, and some of the other challenge questions that we've already talked about before. If John Ramsey is your suspect, how do you think he did it? And the next question would be, do you think that we should call Lou Smith's credibility into question? Is he just a respected detective who made a mistake? Is he an honest detective who got influenced by the Ramseys? Was he just somebody who was trying to do the right thing? Then he went down the wrong path and refused to budge? And also, if John Ramsey is involved with this, do you think he's the most sociopathic liar in the world? And I'm not even joking. If somebody is going to do as many public appearances as he did, talking nonstop about the Ramsey case, just saying DNA, 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 and he was involved the whole time, and he knew the truth the whole time, is that not the biggest sociopathic lie in human history? I would say that it's pretty much up there. Because to give credit to Pat Brown, even though I don't always speak highly of her, I did a direct response to her JonBenet material for this series. She just said, I can see through JonBenet's facade. I can see through John Ramsey's facade. Excuse me if I said JonBenet. I can see through John Ramsey's facade. John Ramsey is trying to make himself look like he is this gentle old man, this gentle family man. She's like, I can see through it. He is somebody who is actually very cold-hearted. You know who else said the exact same thing? Detective Linda Arndt on the day of. And those are suspicions. This is also where we have to be able to differentiate between suspicions and hard evidence. But I've had these suspicions too, and I've also noticed problems in the stories. And one of you guys in the comments section said that they thought Pat Brown and the Deception Detective hit the nails on the head. And I've talked about both of these people a lot during the JonBenet series because they made lots of videos and lots of content about the JonBenet Ramsey case. And they really do notice certain things. If we're going to pay attention to awkward word choices and bizarre conduct, I just told you guys that I was watching the CrimeCon presentation from John Ramsey that he did with Paula Woodward, and he says, the police have this theory that Burke murdered his sister. Whoa, and he just said it in a way that sounded so awkward. I'm like, why wouldn't you just say Burke murdered JonBenet? I mean, do you not know her name? She was named after you, JonBenet Ramsey, JonBenet Ramsey. So, it's just the way that he is saying it is just very bizarre. And the Ramseys have done this for 28 years. They have done this so long, though, where they're just saying things that make people second guess them. They're talking in a way that almost implicates themselves, or it acts like they're trying to hide something, or they sound like somebody would sound if they were not telling the truth. But what's my favorite saying to all you long-time listeners of Black Box Online Radio? Being weird is not a crime. And is this just the biggest case of being weird is not a crime? I'm really not there yet. I mean, in the past, I was a very big defender of the Ramseys. I just thought that they were unfairly vilified for all the reasons. But then I started to recognize that perhaps there could be some truth to these particular claims. Next challenge question. What do you think about my order of suspects where I haven't abandoned the intruder theory? John Ramsey, out of the Ramsey family, for me, is absolutely the most likely culprit, then Burke, then Patsy, and I've also noticed that supporters of the Ramsey did it angles are frequently looking at Patsy first, then they switch to Burke, and then they almost just always stay with Burke. It starts out with they're questioning Patsy, and then they're moving on to Burke Ramsey and acting like he was responsible for everything. And they don't seem to back down from that, and they don't budge from that. But let me know what you think about anything that has been discussed in this episode. I would love to know your responses to anything related to the JonBenet Ramsey case. I've also talked to you about some books that I would like to incorporate into a future series on JonBenet Ramsey that might happen next year, maybe just in the near future, let's say that, like Paula Woodward's book, John Wesley Anderson's book, James Kollar's book can be included as well. And I want to say something to you guys. And this is just a very honest statement, and that is that you cannot get your news from forum posts. You cannot use forum posts as an excuse for or a supplement to hard evidence. Looking at forums and discussion threads can be valuable when you're trying to get ideas, opinions. Maybe somebody has connected the dots in a particular way, because an independent YouTuber, even like myself, is only going to be a continuation of that process. All right, this is the information. Maybe I'm thinking about the information in a different way. And that's why I do this segment. That's why I do all the segments on Black Box Online Radio. But I think with the JonBenet Ramsey case, more than any other case that I talk about here on Black Box Online Radio, what I've encountered is that forums and discussion threads can be valuable when people are sharing access to the primary sources or access to police records. When someone is like, no, that's not what happened. Here, look, here's the police transcript. Here's the interview transcript. And when they provide those items, then I'm like, all right, excellent. Let's just get right to the source material. So people can use these forums and threads for the purposes of sharing information. And I've done that so many times during this series when somebody provides, this is the link to the coroner's report. This is the link to an interview that Patsy did with the police where she's talking about the high-tech boot prints. And, it turns out to be, now we're getting a little bit closer to the heart of the issue. And one of the other things that I think was very surprising for me during this particular series relates to the high-tech boot prints. At first, I was like, you know what, the high-tech boots, maybe these things have, maybe they're the key to everything. Because if you watch certain documentaries, like I watched back in 2016, and even on Aphrodite Jones, they were talking about how the boot print was the same as the one that was owned by an individual named Michael Helgoth, who was a criminal that lived in the area and committed suicide shortly after JonBenet's murder. But ultimately, Michael Helgoth's boot print was the wrong size. And there was this YouTuber out there called Brain and Beyond, whom I mentioned in multiple episodes for this series, and I was shocked when she said my theory from 2018, back in 2018, like I was somebody who was just on YouTube on those old black box recordings saying, I think it was Michael Helgoth and at least one other participant, maybe two participants. And that's what she just said. She's like, I think that it was Michael Helgoth and maybe one or two participants. But she also provided a condition that I hadn't thought about in the past, and that was maybe Michael Helgoth murdered JonBenet, and then they just measured the boot print incorrectly. But I don't really know if there's any evidence to support that. And let's look at this. Let's look at her claim, actually. Her claim actually goes against the evidence, and she's making an assumption to try and make the evidence fit her claim. Well, I can't endorse that one right now. But what do you think about anything that has been discussed in this episode? And also, what books, documentaries, theories do you look to for stories on the JonBenet Ramsey case? I think out of all the stories that I talk about here on Black Box Online Radio, the JonBenet Ramsey case is more widely discussed than any of them. I think that this particular true crime story is discussed more frequently. I told you in the introduction, maybe the most famous unsolved mystery in American history, who killed JonBenet Ramsey. There have been countless channels that are putting out AI-generated content specifically related to JonBenet. There are YouTubers who are putting out content at faster rates than I have seen with any of the other cases that I follow. Even the Zodiac Killer and D.B. Cooper. People are they're churning out new JonBenet episodes every single day here on YouTube. Thousands upon thousands of hours, and a lot of it is AI slop. And one thing, though, is AI and ChatGPT and even Google are not at levels yet when they can verify the information. They can create language, But we're not even talking about pulling from accurate sources. They can pull from sources and get the information wrong. I have seen this so many times, and it's absolutely saddening. But I would love to know, what do you think about my challenge questions from this episode? What do you think about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey? Who do you think was involved? Thank you so much for listening to my final rambling thoughts about this particular case. And unfortunately, I have to tell you that I don't know what happened. But maybe one day we will know the answers to everything in the JonBenet Ramsey story. Thank you for also listening to Black Box Online Radio and checking out the other stories about the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, D.B. Cooper, and the Black Dahlia. And Monday through Friday, I also release shorts and reels here on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. My Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and on Instagram it's blackboxonlineradio. And please tune in next Tuesday for an episode about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann from Praia da Luz, Portugal back in 2003. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnid88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And I will see you tomorrow for a new episode about Jack the Ripper. Until next time.